Welcome back to our parenting class. We are wrapping up a video from Andy Stanley today, and we had set up last week talking about continuing to go through that love is patient, love is kind, does not envy, does not boast. And we had a pretty neat conversation, I thought, about kind of that sense of ego and self compared to with like the way that you're disciplining your children. And we talked a lot about honor, and we kind of cut off in the middle of a point he was making just for the sake of time. And he makes so many points at any given moment that it's really hard to talk about everything he says in one conversation. But he talked a lot about how the rules in his household were all focused around honor, and how instead of just making a list of you can't do this and you must do this and you must come home at this time, it was about respecting each other and honoring each other, and how that sort of shifted the perspective of parenting and how the kids could understand kind of the norms and the expectations that they had in their family. And that is where we're going to pick up on the video today. So this video, I think, is probably like the most practical series of just information he's going to give, in the sense that he sort of set us up to talk about honor. And we kind of were left with some wondering questions last time of like, well, what does it look like when there's dishonor? And what does it look like when you break that trust? And this is the chance where he answers that. So he talks a lot about discipline and correction and sort of like his philosophy of that, which hopefully will be helpful. So I'm going to share my screen, and we have about a 10-minute clip. And yeah, I hope this is helpful for you. I thought it was very interesting.
I want to get really practical. If you choose, and I hope you will, if you choose kindness and honor as centerpieces for your home, then any behavior that's dishonoring requires a response. It requires disciplining. Now, in our family, for us, dishonoring behavior was anything that we referred to as one of the 3 Ds. These were the 3 Ds: dishonesty, disrespect, and disobedience. Anytime there was dishonesty, disrespect, or disobedience, we disciplined for these 3 things. Now, childish behavior, that was different. We corrected for childish behavior because we have to teach our kids and coach our kids, but we disciplined for the 3 Ds. So if you choose kindness and honor as centerpieces for your family, then any behavior that's dishonoring requires discipline. You can't ignore it. Ignoring it rewards it. And what's rewarded is repeated. What's rewarded is repeated. So if you want to raise dishonest, disrespectful kids, just ignore it when you see it. That's really all it takes. Nature will take it from there. But if you don't want dishonest, disrespectful kids, you have to discipline for it. But here's the thing. For the discipline to be effective, not just scary and not just something to be avoided, for discipline to be effective, the discipline must directly address the fact that a relationship has been damaged. In other words, there has to be a correlation, and maybe a question will help explain this. If dishonoring behavior, think about it this way. If dishonoring behavior breaks or undermines a relationship, remember lying, I don't want you to lie because lying breaks the relationship. If dishonoring behavior breaks or undermines a relationship, what should the goal of your discipline be? I want you to think about this. If the fundamental problem with dishonesty and disrespect or disobedience is that it disrupts or undermines the relationship between you and your children, or maybe between your children and someone else, if the real issue, and it is, if the real issue is a break in trust, a break in the relationship, what should the goal of your discipline be? When we discipline our children, what should we be trying to accomplish? Now, again, I've been doing this a long time. I spent many, many years working with middle school and high school parents, and here's what I observe. For many parents, and I understand this, for many parents, there's not really a goal. But if there's not a goal in your discipline, then it's not really discipline. It's just punishment, because discipline makes a person better. This is why we all wish we were more disciplined. But punishment rarely makes anybody better. Punishment just makes people careful so they don't get caught next time. It doesn't make us better, but it certainly has the potential to make us bitter, right? And here's why, because the message of punishment is this: if you don't obey me, bad things will happen to you. And when you think about most of the punishment that goes on in most homes, assuming it's going on, it's really little more than payback. You did something bad, so I'll do something bad to you. You inconvenienced me or you embarrassed me, so I'm going to inconvenience and I'm going to embarrass you. So again, if dishonoring behavior breaks or undermines the relationship, think about it, then what should the goal of your discipline be? And the answer is restoration of the relationship. The goal of discipline is restoration of the relationship. If disobedience, disrespect, dishonesty damage the relationship with you or anyone else, the discipline should facilitate restoring the relationship. So here's the takeaway. Discipline your children in the direction of relationship restoration. And the sooner you start, the better, because relationship restoration is something that must be taught. We don't come into the world understanding how to do this. And in fact, let's face it, you know some adults who've never figured this out. Perhaps you've never figured this out. If you've ever said, I don't know why you're still upset. I said I was sorry. If you have ever said this or anything like this, perhaps you've never learned the art of restoring a relationship. I don't know why you're still upset. I said I was sorry. You know what the implication is? The implication is, doesn't saying sorry restore the relationship? I mean, doesn't saying sorry get us back to where we were before? No. In fact, in some cases, simply saying you're sorry is insulting. It communicates, something must be wrong with you if you're still not okay after I said I was sorry. Now, the fact that so many parents don't understand this explains, honestly, I think why so many parents are so ineffective with their discipline. They punish. It's just a standalone event. There's no goal and there's no lasting outcome, and nobody is better and nobody is better off. And I think, too, it's why there's such little creativity in parental discipline. Parents just take things away. Maybe this is your habit. They put their kids in timeout. When they're older, they just put them on restriction and ground them. None of which has anything to do with restoring a broken relationship. Jimmy mouthed off to me, so I took his PlayStation away for a week. Really? Well, how's the relationship going? Well, he hates me. Taking stuff away should be a last resort because nobody learns anything. They just try harder not to get caught next time. Now, if you're tracking along with me, you may be thinking, and I hope you're thinking, okay, Andy, I get it, but how? What does it look like? What do I do? And I'm going to give you 2 examples in a minute. But here's the thing. You are smart enough to figure this out. Once you recognize, and this is so important, this is important in your marriage, this is important raising your kids, this is important for your kids to understand, this is important in every relationship. At the heart of every transgression is a damaged relationship. At the heart of every transgression, I know this is kind of, a big, somewhat of a Bible word. At the heart of any act of dishonesty or disrespect, at the heart of every transgression, something hasn't just happened. At the heart, at the epicenter of what happened is a damaged relationship. Consequently, the discipline must in some way restore the relationship. Otherwise, it's not discipline. It's just behavior modification. If it involves someone outside your family, the relationship may never be completely restored because the other party may not be interested in having a relationship with you or your kids. But even in a situation like that, you still need to coach your kids in the art. It is an art of building a relational bridge, especially if they participated in tearing it down to begin with. Now, this really is not as difficult as it may seem. In fact, as soon as your kids could talk, you probably taught them to apologize. I mean, I certainly hope so. An apology is part of relationship restoration. Here's a little tip on apologies. Require your children to apologize in complete sentences. Sorry is not a complete sentence. Sorry is a sorry excuse for an apology. They've got to own it, so they need a pronoun. I'm sorry. I said this so many times to our kids growing up, especially when I forced them to apologize to each other. All right, tell her you're sorry. Sorry. No. We need a pronoun. I'm sorry. You've got to own it. And of course, you look them right in the eye. I bet you've taught your kids that. But here's the thing. Our kids need to understand, regardless of how old your kids are, they need to understand that when they're dishonest or disrespectful, they've taken something away from the other person. And consequently, because they've taken something away, they owe that person something. This is why we say you owe them an apology. But in most cases, we owe them more than an apology. So here's what I want to suggest you teach your kids to say. And if you don't like my version of this, come up with your own. Here's what you teach them to say. You teach them to say, I'm sorry, and then of course they need to explain exactly what they're sorry for. You got to make them say it so they can own it. I'm sorry I disobeyed you. I'm sorry I kicked over your blocks. I'm sorry I came home late. I'm sorry I didn't answer when you call, whatever it is. I'm sorry, right? And then add this. Is there anything I can do to make it up to you? Now, let me just warn you. They're going to hate this part. They're going to hate this. But I'm telling you, this is how you help your children understand that they took something and they owe something. They took something and they owe something. What can I do to make it up to you? And when you teach them to think this way, you're laying the groundwork for restoration and restitution. Sometimes it's appropriate to ask someone for forgiveness, but honestly, sometimes it's not. And we will save a discussion on that for another time. Couple of illustrations. When our boys were around 8 and 10 years old, Sandra and I came home from a date and discovered that they had been extremely disrespectful to the babysitter. I mean, it was a nightmare. And this is somebody we'd known for a long time, and she was hesitant to complain, but she did, and we were so glad she did. And she needed to. When we got home, the boys were asleep, so we didn't wake them up. But the next morning, Sandra woke them up, sent them to their little desk, and had them write an apology note to Pam. Each one wrote an apology note. But that was just the beginning. When they finished, Sandra read over the notes to make sure they were fine. Then she told them to get dressed up a little bit, get their little wallets, and get some money out of their savings jar and meet her in the car. And they had no idea what was going on, and she did not tell them until everybody was buckled up and they were driving down the driveway. And then she laid out the game plan. She said, boys, we are going to Kroger, and you're going to go inside and you're going to buy Pam flowers with your own money. And then we're going to drive to Pam's office, and you're going to deliver the flowers and the notes, and you're going to apologize. And they were mortified. Honestly, they would have preferred that we take away everything in their rooms for an indefinite period of time. And not to mention, they hated wasting their money on flowers. They were humiliated. They were shamed. It was perfect. And here's the other thing. Pam didn't know they were coming. So picture this, and neither did the other people in her office. So imagine it. Here they walk in, and here's Sandra and these two little boys with these flowers and an envelope, and they make their way to her office. And of course, she was in tears, and Sandra was standing behind them. They'd rehearsed in the car exactly what they're going to say. They're not just going to say sorry. They're going to say, I'm sorry. And then they are going to elaborate on exactly what they were sorry for. It was wonderful. It was terrible. It was perfect. But when all was said and done, and when all was said and paid for, the relationship was restored. Sandra disciplined them in the direction of relationship restoration. Now, granted, because I know what some of you moms are thinking, that took a lot of time. Of course it did. It was time consuming. It required some creativity, but it was discipline. It wasn't just punishment. It was a means to an end. They were better for it. Years later.
He has more to say, and he has some other great examples, but as per usual, he just gave us a lot of information all at one time. So I'm gonna give us a chance to pause and just talk about kind of what he brought up. So I have some points that I thought was super interesting and would love to talk about, but kind of what stood out to y'all? What was hitting home today?
I think a lot of what he talked about is important in adult relationships too. I mean, just saying sorry, and then 2 hours later, why are you still upset with me? Like I said, I was sorry. What's the big deal? And, nothing's been done to really restore the relationship in a way that feels right to the person who was wronged in the first place. The offending person just wants it to be over with. The wronged person wants to be healed from the hurt. And so two different interests involved at first on that, I think.
Yeah, and that takes a lot more effort than just saying sorry. I think it's such a wonderful way to teach children. This is, to me, I don't know, one of the most meaningful things that he teaches, and having those 3 rules of, dishonesty, disrespect, disobedience. That's what everything boils down to.
I think it was very meaningful, the whole I'm sorry, because I think it's so important for the offender to really understand what it is that they did that upset the other person. And I think putting words to it is huge, because sometimes I think we don't necessarily know what we did. And a child too may not understand what exactly they did that made you so upset. And so putting words to it, I think, is pretty important and pretty powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that formula was nice. That I'm sorry, what can I do?
Well, it was alarming to me how it brought to light everything that I've been doing is just behavior modification and not actually disciplining my children. Because that's all I was trying to do was change the behavior. I wasn't literally teaching them a lesson. So that was eye-opening to me to give them a, and I love the example of, making them go buy flowers and take them to that woman's office. I mean, that's something they'll never forget, even at 8 and 10. So, and unfortunately I got kicked off about halfway through, so I missed the meat of it. But anyway, that part I really enjoyed.
What stood out to me is, and he mentioned it, is how I think it's so hard as parents to discipline correctly, because it does take a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of time to do it right. And it's so much easier just to take the Xbox away or to take the phone away. But her punishment, it wasn't even a punishment, her discipline was fantastic. And like James said, I mean, it's something they will always remember. I thought that was really interesting, but that's what stood out to me, just the time and effort it takes to do that, I think, is something that parents probably struggle with a lot.
Yeah, I think it was helpful just to phrase this conversation discipline in the sense of like starting off with a conversation about honor, instead of it just being like, we didn't like what you did, so therefore we'll just use this one instance to, like, whatever the behavior was, we'll just fix that behavior. But in the kind of the broader scope of what is honor and what isn't honor, and how do we just move as a whole family towards honor. I thought that was a helpful change of perspective.
I think it gets a little more difficult as the child gets older, when the child is younger. And that's why it's so important to start out with this when your children are young, because you're teaching them through these natural kind of consequences and this atmosphere of discipline. But then you get a teenager that's just out and out defiant. It's a lot harder, I think, to figure out how to teach them to restore the relationship and what the discipline should be.
And I was thinking kind of about the same thing, and how we find out, like, that situation that he explained was simple because the babysitter could report back, and this is probably splitting semantic hairs, but you know, he said like she didn't want to complain, but I'm glad she did. And really, she wasn't complaining. She was being honest. You know, she was reporting in truthfully about what happened. And I don't really see that as a complaint. I would want people who are responsible for my children to be honest with me, you know, if there were an issue during that time. But then, yes, as they get older and they're further away, we don't have people necessarily who can report in and let us know. And so keeping the communication open with your child, with their friends, with adults, whoever is interacting with them, and knowing that you have relationships with people that will be honest with you, I think is important too. And that's going to take a lot of work also. So yeah, it's a time consuming and thought consuming endeavor, I think, to do it this way. And I'm with James. I've never quite thought about it like this. I've always thought about it as, you know, there's a repercussion for doing something wrong, which is more the punishment aspect of it than it is the discipline aspect. So I think there's growth opportunities for all of us there.
And that gets into what Brown mentioned too, of like, we're not always good as adults about being good apologizers. And so if you're not modeling that behavior of like, I know I did something wrong, here's how I'm going to be very proactive about restoring that relationship, then how would someone else know how to do that?
And you have to sort of set aside to make it effective, the natural tendency to be angry. If you're either the parent, I can't believe you treated the babysitter that way, or if it's a one-on-one thing where you were wrong, the anger makes you want to kind of lash out. And then if you do that, the other person is defensive, and you don't get any progress made on resolving the situation the way it needs to be done, because it becomes an elevated emotional thing. And that's hard to do, particularly if you have multiple kids in a busy household, and, you know, suppers, you know, burning on the stove and all these other things going on. It's hard to be quite as detached as Andy and his wife were in that situation.
Well, it probably helped him that the boys were asleep, you know. That probably worked in his favor, or in their favor too, maybe. Although it's hard to imagine Andy really blowing a stack.
So he said something that I thought was interesting, like a way that I had never framed it in my head, but I think it'd be interesting to sort of parse out, and maybe it's splitting hairs. But he said that dishonesty is taking something away from somebody. And so then that's why the goal is restoration. I thought that was interesting, because I think that changes the way that I would think of like a lie or not quite telling the whole truth. Did y'all have any pushback on that, or is that maybe it wasn't connecting in my brain because it's not how I thought of dishonesty in the past, but this is exactly how you think of dishonesty, and we just have different definitions.
What I understood was that in each one of those 3 guidelines that they set for their family, the dishonesty, the disrespect, and the disobedience, in each of those cases, something has been taken from the other person or from the parent. And so I think it calls for restoration for whichever of those categories the offense fits in. And I think that's just a great way to look at it. He said, you know, the bridge has been broken. You've taken something, and so you need to figure how to restore that, to fix it, to make it better. That's the way I took it. I may not have answered your question exactly.
Well, and I think that also teaches empathy, because it teaches the offender that, hey, it's not all about you, and you know, this lie or whatever, this offense not only affects you, but it affects other people. And you know, oftentimes you know, I can speak from my own experience when I was a child, and when I was doing something wrong and my parents would get mad, I was like, well, yeah, I lied, but how does that hurt you? So now it really puts the onus on that person to really think through, okay, I really, this affects other people and I've damaged a relationship. So makes me think about how I can heal that. So I thought that was brilliant.
In the example that we didn't watch just for the sake of time, and watching a video on share screen isn't always the most engaging thing, he shares this example of later when his sons were older. One of them was really rude to his wife, their mom, and it really hurt her feelings, and she was very hurt by that. And the way that they moved towards restoration of relationship and corrected that behavior was that they made him take her out on a date, like drive, open the car door for her, pick the restaurant, pay, and like drive her home, and like be respectful the whole time. And how at the time he was so mad, the son was so mad because he had already been mad at his mom, and that's why he'd been rude to her. And then having to then spend extra time one-on-one with her right away was like his least that's how I did not want to spend a weekend night. But that then looking back on that occasion years later, like they talk about that as one of their favorite memories together, because it was a chance to spend time one-on-one, and they had great conversation and they got to talk. And he then had to do the formal apology that he gives us the formula for in this video. But I was really impressed by that, to see kind of two different ways of restoring that relationship. But also, both of those do definitely take a lot more time, and also the ability to, as like the offended against person, be willing to accept that apology. What do y'all think about that?
Well, that sort of tags on what I said earlier about it's difficult as they get older. And, you know, I'd forgotten about that example. Particularly at that age, I think, where just having that one-on-one time with a parent and being able to talk about it in a calm manner, in a nice setting, you know, with a restaurant, and he was having to cough up his money for that. That was part of the restoration, you know, to restore the feelings between them. So that was a great example of how to deal with an older child, because I think time with them is tough to get. You know, they're busy. They don't want to spend time with you. So that's a good one to keep in mind.
And again, that's an example of making them do something. That's a tangible act versus just a verbal apology, which, you know, they may forget 5 minutes later, but this taking them out for an event that's going to last for a long time.
Yeah, they're probably not going to remember that time when I was 13 and you took my Xbox away from me. That sure was a good memory I had. You know, that's not going to be the same thing.
Well, it does occur to me that in these examples, the offender is actually kind of doing a penance, as opposed to us, the offended, just taking, you know, it's an action on our part, taking something away from them, as opposed to putting the action on them and making them, you know, do something. As the old Catholic girl in me, the penance part, you know, doing an act of repentance. It's such a minor. When my kids were little, I didn't like the words, that's not fair. Like it was important for me to make my kids know, like, the world isn't fair, you know, and whatever it is. And so I would always, the rule in our house was that they had to do 10 push-ups every time they said that's not fair.
Mhm.
To this day, my kids will get on the ground and do some push-ups if someone says that's not fair. And I know it's not the same, but it does, that act of them having to do that makes them think before they say those words, you know? So I do think that the action is important, like doing something as opposed to just having something done to you.
That's good, Stacy. My mom used to always say, "Well, I'm so sorry. I don't remember ever telling you that life is fair." You know?
Yeah, I do like that idea of how this sort of shifts the responsibility onto whoever has, I mean, this is a parenting conversation, so theoretically it's onto the kids, but whoever has damaged that relationship, that it's then their responsibility to restore it, I think is a good general kind of rule. If that's how it always works, then I think it's, you're not having, maybe if you're in the habit of doing this and there's the brain power required to figure out kind of how to restore the relationship would theoretically be a learning curve, and you'd be better at it as time went on. So what is like the takeaway for you this week? Like, what's the thing that you would like to either incorporate into what you do or incorporate into, I mean, this is apologies are things that you do forever. We all continue to make mistakes and hurt other people's feelings and do things poorly in our relationship with others. So kind of what are you taking away from this week for yourself or for your family?
I really feel like this is one of the more meaningful videos for me, because I feel like there's something that everybody can take away. I mean, I can act this way as well, and it'll make you feel a little bit more, be more cognizant of when you have injured somebody, of being very, the words, intentional about repairing that relationship and not just saying, oh, well, you know, I'm sorry, because I'm certainly guilty of that. I hate to say I'm sorry. Like, my family makes so much fun of me, and I raised a daughter, Emma, who's the same way. We don't like to say we're wrong. So I do think it's important for everybody to use these tools in just everyday life. I think this is a really valuable lesson that Andy brings to the forefront.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I don't like to apologize either. And I'll do it with my child much more quickly than I will with my spouse. I find it easier, I think, because I feel like I know less about that. So I find that there's more room to apologize about in that relationship than it is in my marriage. But I'm working on that. But then also, I think important today is the idea of the gesture accompanied by the introspection and the I statements. I've never been a fan of the, you know, I messed up, so I'm going to bring you flowers gesture. You know, that always seems stereotypical and trite. But if it is accompanied by a thoughtful apology or a letter, and one of the examples today, I think that really does make meaning of it. Or if you can bring it out even further into an action that you can take, I think that that's important. So I've definitely got some time to consider what some appropriate discipline steps would be in cases like that we would encounter.
You know, this is kind of backstepping from where we were on the takeaway, but I was just reminded of a time when my son was probably 13 and paintball guns were very popular. and he was shooting them all around the backyard and everything else. Anyway, he shot up the neighbor's chimney because their driveway was right across the way from our house. And so he was going to have to go and apologize and clean it up and everything. And the father in the household came out there and worked with him, and they did it together. And my son's always thought that was a very, he wasn't being punished because the father brought the cleaning materials. I sent my son over there, but they did it. And I thought that was a very, Christian and good adult child way that neighbor, treated my son in that situation.
He showed forgiveness,
Yeah,
so that
mhm.
just completed the act of restoration, really. Wow.
Well, and I think that's a really important point too, Brown, and Greta, the act of accepting and showing forgiveness. Because I think sometimes in the moment, even if the apology is perfect, sometimes we're not really ready to forgive. And so that's a great point. I mean, just being prepared to offer forgiveness, making it full circle. That's a perfect point.
Yeah, and that's something that he doesn't really talk about in this video, but it is true, is that, I mean, for small things, like he said, so I kicked over your blocks, like you're pretty ready to forgive pretty quickly for that kind of thing. But I mean, if it's a big transgression, just because you apologize doesn't mean someone's ready to accept it. And I think teaching that too is, as adults, we're not always good about that. We think that because we've apologized, it's all better. But it's not always true. Or maybe your apology didn't actually restore the relationship. Well, any other takeaways before we close our time together today? Okay, well, we have one more video of Andy Stanley's left for the semester, and this is what's crazy to me is that this is, to him, is like a 4-week class, and this just like happened all in a month, and we've been going on for this for the whole semester because he has so much to say, and there's just so much to unpack and everything that he says. So I'm really grateful for the recordings on his church website that they're available for us to watch and hit pause and kind of unpack as we go. We will take a 2-week break of this class this week, this coming Sunday and next Sunday, because it will be Palm Sunday and Easter. If you can imagine it, we are really rocketing our way through Lent, and we are nearly at the season of Easter, which completely blows my mind. So we'll be gone for a little bit, and then we'll come back once we're a bit more into the Easter season. So yeah, a little bit of a cliffhanger of where is he going next in the video, but we wrapped up this video, and we'll start back with his last of the series after Easter is over. And with that, I'm going to close us in prayer. So the Lord be with you. God, I thank you for the opportunity to meet together via Zoom. I thank you that we can be together as a community even when we're not together in person. I thank you for the opportunity to learn and grow and be better after our mistakes, and for the opportunity to be restored in right relationship with each other and with you through your Son and through the ways that we can model you in our relationships in this world. Pray that as we continue this season of Lent and head into the season of Easter, that we would be people of restoration and people of moving in right relationship, and that when we come together again in a few weeks, we would know you better and serve you better and be your hands and feet in the world. In your Son's name we pray. Amen. Well, thanks as always for a great conversation this week, and I hope you all have wonderful ends to the season of Lent and great Easters.
Thanks. You too.
You too, Addie. Appreciate it.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.